Lydia grew up in a small town where everyone knew each other's names and everyone went to the same church. For as long as she could remember, the church was her second home. Its stained glass windows glowed with warm colors on Sunday mornings, the choir's voices filled the air, and Pastor Daniel stood tall at the pulpit, commanding respect with his deep voice and confident smile. Her parents trusted him. Everyone did. To the people in town, Pastor Daniel wasn't just a preacher. He was a man of God, someone chosen to guide them. And Lydia, young and full of faith, believed every word he said. But life at home wasn't so perfect. Lydia's mother was very ill. Years of sickness had drained the family's money and hope. Doctors said the treatments were too expensive, and even then they offered no guarantees. Her father worked long hours at the factory, but it was never enough. Lydia prayed every night for a miracle. She prayed until her knees ached, whispering through tears, "God, please save my mother." One Sunday after service, Pastor Daniel called Lydia aside. He placed his heavy hand on her shoulder and looked deep into her eyes. "Child," he said softly, "your faith has been noticed. I can see how much you love your mother, and I believe a miracle is possible for her." Lydia's eyes widened. "A miracle?" "Yes," Pastor Daniel replied, his smile reassuring. "But miracles require sacrifice. They require faith that goes beyond ordinary prayer." Her heart pounded. She wanted to ask what he meant, but his voice carried such authority that she felt too nervous to interrupt. "Come to my office tonight," he continued, lowering his tone. "Alone, and I will show you what must be done to release the blessing you seek." Lydia nodded slowly, unsure but hopeful. If this was what it took to heal her mother, she would do anything. That evening, when the church was empty and quiet, Lydia knocked on the pastor's office door. He welcomed her in, closed the door behind her, and locked it. The sound made her uneasy, but she pushed the thought away. Inside, the pastor spoke with passion. He told her about ancient stories where God tested people's faith with strange commands. He reminded her of Abraham, who was asked to sacrifice Isaac. He spoke of prophets who had to endure shame before receiving glory. Then his voice grew softer, darker. "Lydia, if you truly want your mother to live, you must give something precious. You must give yourself." She froze. "What do you mean?" He leaned closer. "You must sleep with me. This is the way to unlock the miracle. God works through his chosen servants, and I am his vessel. If you trust me, your mother will rise from her bed healed." Lydia's stomach turned. Her chest tightened. It didn't sound right. But then she thought of her mother lying weak at home, coughing, fading. Desperation clouded her mind. What if this was truly the test? What if saying no meant losing her forever? Tears filled her eyes. Will it really help her? Pastor Daniel smiled, a smile that suddenly looked more like a predator's grin than a shepherd's. "You have my word." And so, with trembling hands and a breaking heart, Lydia agreed. That night, she gave up her innocence, believing she was giving it to God. But when she walked home afterward, something inside her felt shattered. She couldn't shake the feeling of shame clinging to her skin. She whispered to herself over and over, "It was for Mama. It was for Mama." Days passed. She waited for the miracle. She prayed harder than ever. She told no one what had happened, not even her best friend or her father. She carried the secret like a heavy stone pressing against her chest. But her mother didn't get better. In fact, her condition worsened. The coughing grew harsher, her body grew thinner, and the doctor's warnings grew more grim. Lydia confronted Pastor Daniel after service. Her voice shook. "You said you promised she would be healed." He looked at her coldly, his smile gone. "Faith takes time, child. Perhaps your sacrifice wasn't enough. Perhaps you didn't believe strongly enough." Her heart sank. He was blaming her. She walked out of the church that day with anger brewing inside her. For the first time in her life, she wondered if the man she trusted most was nothing more than a liar in holy clothing. And deep down, she felt something even darker, fear. If he had deceived her once, what else was he capable of doing? The miracle hadn't come, but the nightmare had only begun. Lydia couldn't sleep for nights after that terrible evening. She replayed Pastor Daniel's words in her mind. "Perhaps your sacrifice wasn't enough." The thought ate at her like poison. What if she had failed? What if her mother died because she didn't do things right? But another voice began to rise in her heart, a voice of doubt, a voice of anger. Why would God demand something so shameful? Why would a pastor twist holy stories into something that sounded like sin? She kept silent, but at church the next Sunday, she felt his eyes on her. Pastor Daniel stood at the pulpit, preaching about faith and obedience, his booming voice filling the sanctuary. To everyone else, he was a man of God. To Lydia, he was a wolf in sheep's clothing. As people shook his hand after service, she noticed something strange. A young woman, not much older than herself, avoided his gaze and rushed out the door. Lydia's eyes caught hers for a brief moment. The girl looked frightened, almost ashamed. Later that week, Lydia went to the grocery store and saw the same girl again. She hesitated but finally walked up to her. "Hi," Lydia said softly. "You go to my church, right?" The girl nodded quickly. "Yes, but I don't stay long anymore." Lydia lowered her voice. "Did Pastor Daniel ever say strange things to you?" The girl's eyes widened, her lips trembled. She grabbed Lydia's hand and whispered, "He told me God wanted me to do things with him. He said it would bring blessings." Tears welled up in her eyes. "I never told anyone. I thought maybe I was crazy." Lydia's stomach dropped. It wasn't just her. She wasn't the only one. The two girls sat outside the store on a bench, speaking in hushed tones. The girl's name was Naomi, and she had been pressured the same way Lydia had. But unlike Lydia, Naomi had refused. She had walked out of his office and never gone back. Still, she carried the shame as if it were her fault. Lydia felt a strange mix of relief and rage. Relief that she wasn't alone. Rage that the pastor had been doing this to others, hiding behind scripture and lies. When she went home that night, Lydia wanted to tell her father. She wanted to scream the truth, but she stopped herself. Pastor Daniel was powerful in the community. Everyone respected him. Who would believe a girl over the pastor? Worse, what if her father confronted him and nothing happened? Then Pastor Daniel would know she had spoken. Fear pressed on her chest. She said nothing. Weeks passed. Her mother's health continued to decline. The doctors warned she might not have much time left. Lydia prayed harder than ever, but now her prayers were mixed with tears of confusion. She no longer knew who to trust, not even herself. One evening, Naomi showed up at Lydia's house. She looked shaken. "I think he's watching me," Naomi whispered. "After I refused him, he started showing up where I was, at the market near my job, even outside my apartment once. He smiled, but his eyes, they weren't kind." Lydia felt cold all over. Pastor Daniel was not only lying, he was dangerous. The two girls made a pact. They would not be silent anymore. But speaking up wasn't easy. They confided in a few close friends at church, only to be met with disbelief. "Pastor Daniel? No, he would never," one woman said. Another warned, "Be careful what you say. That's a man of God." The whispers began spreading anyway. Some people believed them. Others accused them of lying. Tension grew in the congregation. Lydia could feel the walls closing in. One night, Lydia received a message on her phone. It was from a number she didn't recognize. The text read, "Stop spreading lies. You don't know who you're dealing with." Her hands shook as she showed Naomi. "It's him," Naomi whispered. "He knows we're talking." Lydia wanted to cry, but something inside her hardened. She was tired of fear, tired of secrets. If Pastor Daniel thought he could silence her, he was wrong. But she also knew that exposing him would not just risk her reputation. It could risk her safety. She looked out her window into the dark night. For the first time, she realized she wasn't only fighting for her mother's life anymore. She was fighting for her own. The church bells rang as usual on Sunday morning, but to Lydia and Naomi, the sound felt different. Every chime carried the weight of secrets. As they sat together in the pew, their eyes met. They both knew what they had to do. They couldn't stay silent anymore. Pastor Daniel preached with his usual fiery passion. He shouted about purity, obedience, and blessings for the faithful. The congregation nodded, some raising their hands in agreement. Lydia stared at him, her stomach twisting. How could he stand there and speak about holiness while hiding such darkness? Naomi whispered under her breath, "We need proof." Lydia nodded. Without evidence, no one would believe them. Pastor Daniel's reputation was spotless. To the town, he was untouchable. That afternoon, the girls sat in Lydia's room planning. They wrote down everything they remembered. The words he said, the times he called them aside, the details of his office. Naomi even admitted she had kept an old voicemail from him where his tone was suggestive, though not outright explicit. "I didn't delete it," she said quietly. "I didn't know why, but something told me to keep it." Lydia felt a spark of hope. That's something. If we gather more, they'll have to listen. Over the next few weeks, they worked carefully. Naomi pretended to show renewed interest in church activities, just to get closer and observe him. Lydia carried her phone everywhere, ready to record. Then one night, Pastor Daniel messaged Lydia directly. His words sent chills through her. "I see you've been restless. Don't forget your promise to God. If you need another blessing, come to my office again, tonight." Her heart pounded as she showed Naomi. "This is it," Naomi whispered. "Go, but this time record everything." Lydia's hands shook as she prepared her phone. She didn't want to step into that office again, but she knew it might be their only chance. That evening, she walked through the church doors, the halls eerily quiet. When she reached the office, Pastor Daniel was waiting, his smile wide, his eyes gleaming. "Lydia," he said smoothly, "you've returned. I knew your faith was strong." She forced a small smile, hiding the phone in her pocket, recording every word. Pastor Daniel spoke again about miracles, about sacrifice, about how God used unusual ways to bless his children. Then, lowering his voice, he said, "You know what you must do. Lay with me again and the blessing will come." Lydia's stomach turned, but she kept her composure. "And if I do?" His expression hardened. "Then your mother will die, and it will be because you lacked faith. Do you want her blood on your hands?" Her chest tightened. Rage and fear burned inside her, but she kept her face calm. She excused herself quickly, pretending she needed time to pray, and rushed out of the church. Naomi was waiting outside. Lydia's hands shook as she pulled the phone from her pocket. "I got it," she whispered. They played back the recording together. His words were clear enough to reveal his manipulation, his threats, his lies. It wasn't everything, but it was undeniable. From that moment, they had proof, but the victory was short-lived. 2 days later, Lydia received another anonymous message. "You think you're clever? Stop before you regret it." She knew it was him. Somehow, Pastor Daniel had sensed what they were doing. Fear spread like smoke in her chest, but Naomi grabbed her hand. "This is bigger than us now. We have to take this to someone who can help." They decided to approach a local journalist known for covering corruption in small towns. His name was Mr. Harris, a man with sharp eyes and a reputation for uncovering truths others tried to bury. When they met him in a quiet cafe, Lydia's voice shook as she shared everything. Naomi played the voicemail. Lydia handed over the recording. Mr. Harris leaned forward, his expression serious. "This," he said slowly, "is very dangerous. You're accusing one of the most powerful men in your town. If we publish this, it could shake everything." "We don't care," Lydia whispered. "He's been hurting people for too long. He made me believe God wanted something disgusting. He almost ruined me." Naomi nodded fiercely. "And if we stay quiet, he'll keep doing it. We can't let him." Mr. Harris studied them both, then nodded. "All right, I'll investigate, but you must be prepared. He will fight back. Men like him always do." As they left the cafe, Lydia felt both lighter and heavier at once. Lighter because the truth was finally on its way to being revealed. Heavier because she knew Pastor Daniel wouldn't go down quietly. That night when Lydia tried to sleep, her phone buzzed again. A new message appeared. "Judas always dies first." Her blood ran cold. The proof was in their hands, but so was the danger. And Lydia knew the storm was just beginning. By the time Mr. Harris began digging deeper, whispers about Pastor Daniel already buzzed in the community. People noticed Lydia and Naomi meeting with him. Rumors spread fast in small towns, and it didn't take long before Pastor Daniel caught wind of their actions. The retaliation came swiftly. On the following Sunday, Pastor Daniel stood at the pulpit with tears streaming dramatically down his face. His voice shook as he declared, "My heart is broken. Satan has risen against me through lies spoken by those I once trusted. I have served this church faithfully for decades, and now the enemy is using children to try and destroy God's house." The congregation gasped. Some women sobbed. Men shook their heads in anger. Lydia sat frozen in the pew, Naomi gripping her hand tightly. They knew he was talking about them, though he never said their names. He continued, "They say I have acted in shameful ways, but I tell you this. These accusations are nothing but jealousy and evil. They are attempts to tear apart our faith, and I will not allow Satan to win." The crowd erupted in applause. People stood, shouting, "Amen." Lydia felt her stomach twist. Instead of exposing him, he was turning the entire town against them. After service, people who once smiled warmly at her now glared. A woman hissed, "How dare you slander the pastor?" Another whispered, "Poor girl, she's confused." The most painful moment came when her own aunt approached her, shaking her head. "Lydia, stop this nonsense. Don't let the devil use you." Lydia ran home in tears. "Naomi, what if no one believes us? What if they think we're just liars?" Naomi clenched her fists. "That's why we gave the recordings to Mr. Harris. Once he publishes, they won't be able to deny it." But Pastor Daniel wasn't done. Days later, Lydia's father came home furious. "I heard what you've been saying," he shouted. "How could you lie about Pastor Daniel? He baptized you. He buried your grandparents. He's been there for this family." Lydia's throat closed. "Dad, it's true. He forced me. He said it was for a miracle." Her father's face hardened. "Stop. Enough. Don't disgrace this family." He stormed out, leaving Lydia sobbing in her mother's frail arms. Her mother's voice was weak but steady. "I believe you," she whispered. "Don't stop. Even if your father doesn't understand, I know you're telling the truth." Those words gave Lydia strength, but fear never left her. The threats grew. Strange cars parked outside her house at night. Anonymous notes were slipped under her door. "Repent before it's too late." One evening, a brick smashed through her bedroom window with a note tied around it. "Liar." Naomi faced the same. Her landlord suddenly claimed she owed extra rent. At work, rumors circulated about her being loose. Pastor Daniel's supporters were determined to ruin them. Meanwhile, Mr. Harris worked tirelessly. He interviewed other women, and soon more stories came forward. Girls who had been pressured, women who had been propositioned, families who had quietly left the church without explanation. The pattern was undeniable. Still, the danger grew. One night, as Lydia walked home from the store, footsteps followed her. She turned a corner, quickening her pace. A shadow moved faster behind her. Before she could scream, a voice hissed, "Stay silent or you'll regret it." Then the shadow disappeared. Terrified, she called Naomi. "He won't stop. He's trying to scare us into silence." Naomi's reply was firm. "Then we shout louder." The turning point came when Mr. Harris finally published the first article. It was bold, front-page news. "Respected pastor accused of exploiting young women." It included snippets of the recordings, Naomi's voicemail, and testimonies from several victims whose courage grew after Lydia and Naomi spoke out. The town exploded. Some people were outraged, calling it lies. Others began questioning things they had ignored for years. Whispers became open conversations. Pastor Daniel responded furiously. He called an emergency church meeting where he claimed the recordings were edited by the devil, the victims were possessed, and Mr. Harris was an agent of destruction. His voice thundered, "This is persecution. They want to destroy God's messenger." But cracks began to show. A few brave church members stood and asked, "Pastor, why would so many women say the same thing?" Another added, "Why haven't you denied the exact words in the recordings?" For the first time, Pastor Daniel's confidence faltered. His eyes darted, his voice shook. Lydia, sitting quietly in the back, felt a glimmer of hope. The storm was far from over, but the mask was beginning to slip, and she knew the day of reckoning was coming. The article spread like wildfire. Copies of the newspaper were passed around at grocery stores, shared on doorsteps, and whispered about in schoolyards. Social media lit up with arguments, accusations, and heated debates. Some defended Pastor Daniel fiercely, while others finally admitted they had seen things that didn't sit right for years. For Lydia, every day felt like a battlefield. She walked through town with stares burning into her skin. Some eyes were full of hatred, others of sympathy, but all of them reminded her that she was at the center of a storm. Naomi stood by her side, their bond growing stronger under the weight of shared struggle. Inside his grand church office, Pastor Daniel was unraveling. He called emergency meetings with elders, shouting that the accusations were satanic attacks. He tried to use his charisma to calm them, but even among his loyal inner circle, doubt was creeping in. "Why would so many women lie, Pastor?" one elder asked quietly. Daniel slammed his fist on the desk. "Because the devil works through weak vessels," he roared. Meanwhile, Mr. Harris published a second story, this one more damning. It revealed financial inconsistencies in the church accounts, unexplained transfers, and luxury purchases under Daniel's name. The man who preached sacrifice had secretly been living in excess. The cracks widened. Lydia's father, once Daniel's staunch defender, came home pale one evening. He had overheard two men at the hardware store discussing the money trail. Maybe there is truth in this," he muttered. He couldn't meet Lydia's eyes, but his voice was softer than before. It wasn't an apology, but it was the beginning of doubt. That week, Lydia and Naomi were summoned to speak with investigators. The police had finally opened a formal inquiry. The girls sat in a cold office, their voices trembling as they repeated their stories. This time, though, their words were not ignored. The officers listened carefully, recording every detail. When Lydia handed over her audio file, the lead investigator nodded grimly. "This is strong evidence. You've done the right thing." For the first time, Lydia felt a surge of relief. Maybe justice was finally within reach. But Pastor Daniel was not ready to surrender. He launched one last campaign of intimidation. One evening, Lydia's father received a visit from a church deacon who warned, "If your daughter doesn't retract her statement, your family will be shunned. No one in this town will hire her. You'll lose everything." Her father, torn between loyalty to the church and love for his child, finally broke down. That night, he entered Lydia's room, tears streaming. "I don't know what to believe anymore," he whispered, "but I know you're my daughter, and I should have protected you." He pulled her into a trembling hug. For Lydia, it was the moment she realized she wasn't fighting alone anymore. Days later, the church called a final public gathering. Pastor Daniel demanded the chance to clear his name. The sanctuary was packed, the air tense with anticipation. Lydia and Naomi sat near the back, their hearts pounding. Pastor Daniel stormed onto the stage, his face flushed. He thundered about betrayal, about enemies rising from within. He pointed toward the crowd and shouted, "These girls are liars. They've been led astray." His words were desperate, not commanding. Then Mr. Harris, standing quietly at the edge of the crowd, raised his phone and played Lydia's recording through a speaker. The pastor's own voice filled the room. "Lay with me again and the blessing will come." Gasps echoed across the sanctuary. People clutched their chests. Others shouted in disbelief. Daniel's face drained of color. He stammered, That's fake, the devil's trickery." But then another woman stood. "He said the same to me." Another followed. "And to me." Voices rose, one by one, women speaking their truth at last. The sanctuary erupted not in applause, but in outrage. The elders tried to calm the chaos, but it was too late. The mask was gone. Police officers entered quietly through the side door. They approached Daniel, who shouted and flailed, but the handcuffs clicked firmly around his wrists. The man who once stood as a godly giant was dragged out like a common criminal. Lydia sat frozen, tears streaming down her face. Naomi grabbed her hand, squeezing tightly. It was over, or at least the worst of it was. was, the giant had fallen. But as the church emptied in silence, Lydia knew the scars would not disappear overnight. Lives had been shattered, trust had been destroyed, and for her, the battle had taken something she could never get back. Yet in that moment, she also felt something else: strength. She had faced her deepest fear, and she had won. The false prophet had been exposed. But what came after? The night after Pastor Daniel's arrest, Lydia lay in bed staring at the ceiling. For months, she had carried fear like a stone in her chest. Now the stone was gone, but in its place was a hollow ache. The battle was over, yet she couldn't stop trembling. The next morning, the whole town buzzed. Some people avoided eye contact with her family. Others stopped Lydia on the street, whispering, "I'm sorry, I didn't believe you." Naomi received the same mixture of apologies and wary glances. It was strange, like everyone had been living under a spell, and now they were waking up. But not everyone was ready to face the truth. A small group of Daniel's loyal followers gathered outside the courthouse, holding signs that read, "Free our pastor," and "Lies against God's servant." Lydia walked past them once and felt their eyes burning into her. One woman spat near her feet, but instead of shrinking away, Lydia held her head high. She had already faced worse than their anger. Inside the courthouse, Daniel's trial began. The prosecutors presented the evidence: Lydia's recording, Naomi's voicemail, testimony from over a dozen women, and the financial records Mr. Harris uncovered. Piece by piece, the image of the holy man crumbled until all that remained was the truth: a predator in a pulpit. Lydia had to testify. She stood before the judge, her knees weak but her voice steady. She told the story of how Daniel twisted her faith, threatened her mother's life, and demanded her body as a sacrifice. The courtroom was silent except for the scratching of pens. She ended with trembling words, "I thought God hated me, but it was God. It was him. He used God's name to hurt us." Tears filled her eyes, but she did not look away from Daniel. For the first time, he couldn't hide behind his booming voice or false tears. He sat pale, his shoulders slumped, avoiding her gaze. The verdict came weeks later, guilty on multiple counts of exploitation and fraud. Pastor Daniel was sentenced to prison. The man who once stood on the pulpit, commanding hundreds, now sat behind bars, powerless. When the news broke, a heavy silence fell over the town. Some felt shame for defending him, others relief that justice had been served. Slowly, the church began to rebuild under new leadership, choosing transparency and accountability. For Lydia, healing was not immediate. She still woke some nights with nightmares of his office, his threats, his voice. But therapy, prayer, and Naomi's unwavering friendship helped her piece herself back together. Her father, humbled and broken by his earlier disbelief, finally apologized. He sat with her one evening, tears running down his weathered face. "I failed you," he said. "I chose a man's voice over my daughter's truth. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I pray you can give it someday." Lydia squeezed his hand. "I don't know if I can forget, Dad, but I don't hate you. I just wanted you to believe me." From that day, their relationship slowly healed. He became her protector, determined never to doubt her again. Her mother, though still weak, lived long enough to see justice served. She smiled at Lydia one afternoon, whispering, "You saved so many girls, not just yourself." And it was true. As word spread, more women from other towns came forward, emboldened by Lydia's courage. Some were strangers, some were familiar faces, but all carried stories that had once been buried in silence. Lydia's decision to speak had opened the door for countless others to find their voices. Months later, Mr. Harris published a final article, this time not about the scandal, but about the survivors. The headline read, "Voices of Courage: How Two Young Women Stood Against Fear." The story painted Lydia and Naomi not as victims, but as heroes. When Lydia read it, she wept, not out of sadness, but out of release. Still, the scars remained. Fame or praise couldn't erase the pain. Healing wasn't a straight line. It was messy, filled with steps forward and backward. But Lydia learned something important. Her worth was not defined by what had been done to her, but by the strength she found to rise again. One evening, she and Naomi sat watching the sunset. The sky was streaked with orange and purple, the air calm after months of chaos. Naomi nudged her. "Do you ever regret speaking out?" Lydia thought for a long moment. Then she shook her head. "No, because silence would have destroyed me more than his lies ever could. I was afraid before, but now I know my voice matters." Naomi smiled, and it saved lives. The two girls sat quietly, the last rays of light fading into night. Lydia whispered softly, almost to herself, "He tried to take my faith, but in the end he gave me something else, a reason to fight for truth." And with those words, she felt a deep peace wash over her. The storm had passed. The false prophet was gone, but her story, her strength, would remain forever.